Hello, everyone, and welcome to Underneath It All, a Nine Inch Nails podcast. I'm Karen. I'm going to be hosting this first episode, and I thought I'd take a moment before we all got started to explain how this came about. Basically, I love listening to podcasts. I listen to a stupid amount of podcasts, and with all the excitement with the new Nine Inch Nails album coming out, I decided it was time to see if there were any good Nine Inch Nails shows out there, which for some reason, even though I've been a Nine Inch Nails fan for 20 years. It just never occurred to me to look for that. And I was surprised to discover that not only were there no good Nine Inch Nails podcasts, there weren't any. Obviously, this was quite unsatisfactory. So a bunch of us at Echoing the Sound, which is one of the bigger Nine Inch Nails message boards online, decided to try our hands at making such a podcast. Now, I'm aware that a show devoted to just one band might seem a little narrow, but with Nine Inch Nails in particular, I think all of us here think, that we have a fair amount to discuss, both because it's been, Nine Inch Nails itself has been around for over 20 years, there's a lot of history there, and also because there's so many overlapping areas of interest. Some people get into Nine Inch Nails for the music itself, nothing wrong with that. For some, the hook is the music videos, some of which have been quite groundbreaking. For some, it was some of the experimental, almost even weird things, like the alternate reality game that accompanied Year Zero. And there's just all these different things that kind of pull people into NIN that are a little bit more eclectic than just, whatever the hit single on the radio is. People come to this band from all sorts of different angles that they feel that this music or this act speaks to, and that gives us perhaps more grist for the discussion mill, so to speak, than we would have in a lot of other cases. I guess that's probably about as much of an intro as we really need. Hopefully we'll get to discuss a lot of not only Nine Inch Nails stuff, but the larger Nine Inch Nails fandom and some of the projects that have entailed there. So let's move on to introducing our panel for this episode. So let's start with Jeff. Who are you? Who are you with? And how did you get into Nine Inch Nails? Perhaps more importantly.
Let's see. I was a young lad, about 14 years old. It was 1996, and I threw the Downward Spiral into my Discman, and the rest was pretty much history.
Discman.
Oh yeah, back in those Discman.
I should probably get our all wow, we all feel really old bit
definitely
out of the way now, so we don't do it for the whole rest of the podcast. But go ahead, sorry.
But I'm 31 now. I've been listening to them it's been 15 years about. Yeah, that's how I got into NIN, was just listening to the album beginning to end, first time I listened to it, and I've been hooked. And now with the new album, that it correlates with the Downward Spiral, I'm just feeling like this was a good time for us to start a podcast.
Okay, and the last person next to me is Brian.
Hi guys, it's Brian Bittner. I live in Los Angeles, musician, writer, etc. Also 31, and I think I was about 11 when a friend of mine who got me into a lot of the music that I ended up loving had made himself a mixtape that I promptly stole from him and copied for myself, and the first 6 tracks were all from Pretty Hate Machine, and I used to listen to that mixtape on repeat all day, every day, on my Walkman. And then I think when I was about 11 or 12, I bought Pretty Hate Machine, and then eventually Downward Spiral and Broken, and went from there. When I was 13, my first concert ever was Nine Inch Nails with David Bowie, which was, that was quite an experience. I'm jealous of 13-year-old me, because I want to go back and really appreciate what I saw, rather than just being like, oh yeah, this is normal, this happens all the time, right? And I've been a fan since. I've seen them 8 times, I think, and have all the goods.
Alrighty, I guess that brings us back to me. I am also 31. I was not going to give my age on this podcast, but considering that 2 of you are also 31, it just seemed too coincidental not to mention it. Let's see, I think when I was about 14 or 15, I started hearing Closer on the radio a lot, and at the time, I was a snobby, precocious kid, and I did not like it at all. I was like, this is shock rock, this is like that Marilyn Manson crap the kids in my art class listen to. I don't like this at all. But then one night, I think at midnight, I was up late drawing, and they played Head Like a Hole, and I was shocked when I heard at the end that it was Nine Inch Nails, because that was not what I had imagined Nine Inch Nails to be like at all. And I thought, this song would be really great for rollerblading. So I bought Pretty Hate Machine, and I used to rollerblade around my neighborhood, including in my Hebrew school parking lot, which made me feel like such a rebel.
Nice.
That was about as great an act of rebellion my teenage years produced, which says a lot. But yeah, I've also been a Nine Inch Nails fan for, well, not quite 20 years, but going on 20 years, and it's hard to pick my favorite album. It really, like a lot of people, it depends on my mood, depends what's going on. Okay, so that's gives you a vague idea who we all are, and just for the record, listeners, we did not know each other before this podcast. This is really fun and exciting for everybody.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I think from now on we have to have a rule. You can only be 31 to be on this podcast.
Which means we're all screwed in a few months.
Yes.
No. You have to be the same age we are. Once we turn 32, you can only be 32.
Perfect.
Yeah. Setting down the ground rules now.
Yeah, we definitely need to get like a 19-year-old on at some point to hear. We all kind of the same history,
Yeah. Year zero rules. Rules.
Fascinated to hear somebody who's like, oh yeah, I heard The Hand That Feeds and I bought With Teeth and then I got everything else. And it's like, wow, really?
Like, wow, those people exist, don't they?
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Speaking of albums, look at that beautiful segue there.
It would have been beautiful if you didn't call attention to it.
God damn it. Obviously, the reason why we're all getting together today to discuss this is because today is the release date for Hesitation Marks, Nine Inch Nails' 8th studio album, I believe. Although I think it's only the 8th if you don't count Broken, which always seems a little backwards to me.
Yeah.
But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's see. When Came Back Haunted came out a couple of months ago, I was going through a phase of not really listening to Nin. Like, I kind of drop out of music periodically and just forget that I'm into music. Then Came Back Haunted came on, and I was like, oh, right, Nine Inch Nails. Nine Inch Nails is awesome. Woo! Started listening to all my old stuff and was generally quite excited throughout the summer waiting for this album to come out and actually watched some of the clips from the festival shows that the band played over the summer. The one thing I wasn't keen on during the lead-up to the album was the title. When I first heard the title and I found out what it meant, I was like, are we really still, like dwelling on the suicide theme? That kind of seems like shouldn't we be past this already? But then, the more I learned about the album, the more it started to make sense to me, because I realized this album isn't about committing suicide. It's about looking at the scars on your arm and knowing you were once that person who might have done that at one point.
Yeah.
So
yeah, you survived it.
Yeah, a lot of things that initially about this album I was kind of like, I don't know. When I saw the whole thing come together in context over the summer, and of course when we got to hear the whole thing over the last week, it really all kind of clicked into place for me. So how did the rest of you feel as the album was leaking in bits and pieces, both figuratively and literally, I suppose? Jeff, what do you think?
Oh, I've been listening to The Fragile on a loop before the album was downloaded, and that's my favorite album is The Fragile, and I was, I also caught some of the festival shows like you were saying, and I heard Copy of or Copy of whatever, however you want to say it.
I always do that, by the way. Whenever I try to say that song, I always...
Oh, my goodness.
Copy of come on.
Copy of Yeah, once I heard that, I was like, all right. I was definitely getting more pumped for it. I hadn't been listening to Nin for a while. And I'm glad that he didn't announce the album any sooner than what he did. Usually he does it, and it takes 3 years before he releases it. So the build-up was great, but it wasn't as bad as it could have been, I suppose.
Yeah.
Right, and Brian, how did you feel about the build-up?
I was excited at first when he came out and he said, like, oh, it's very different. We're looking at things from a very different angle, trying a bunch of new stuff. And then I heard Came Back Haunted, and I was like, all right, this just kind of sounds like the new Hand That Feeds, Beginning of the End, Discipline. Those single songs are getting better, but they still feel like you could there's like an app for a Nine Inch Nails song, and you could just
copy and paste.
Right, exactly. And I thought, okay. And then, I saw the album cover and the album title, which sounded like a John Mayer album title at first before I actually knew what it meant. And my concern was that he was going back to the kind of going back to basics and being like, well, if I do the Downward Spiral artwork, then it'll be fine if the album's not that interesting or not that whatever, And then he said in an interview, like, he wanted the artwork to be the opposite of what the album sounded like, and I was like, well, that sounds strange, no matter what is going on. To be like, this sounds nothing like the Downward Spiral, so let's make it look exactly like the Downward Spiral. And then, I'll get into how I feel about the whole album later, but in the end, I'm happy with it. And I once I heard Copy of and all that kind of stuff, I started to think, okay. And then I am in love with the album now. So it had a good ending, but it had me very wary on the lead up.
Yeah, I think a lot of people had similar concerns, and I know I was concerned when I heard about Trent's enlisting Russell Mills, that it was going to be a bit, not a rehash of the Downward Spiral, but maybe that parallel between the two albums would be a little bit too on the nose, and you'd be sitting there thinking, oh, I get it, this is like the modern Closer, this is like the modern Reptile. But actually, I think and we'll get to this in a minute, but I think the relationship between the two is much more subtle and interesting than that, so I was really, really pleased with how that turned out. Mm-hmm. Okay, so obviously, probably the most important thing we're going to do today is just talk about the album, go through it track by track, see which ones we loved, which ones we disagree on, which ones we have different interpretations of. Okay, so first track on the album, Eater of Dreams, a little instrumental ditty. For some reason, the word ditty came into my head, even though that's absolutely something my dad would say. But
did a Victory remix once, right?
What?
You did a Victory remix once, right?
That ditty.
That ditty.
Personally, I didn't really like this track at first. I was like, well, it's no opinion. But the more I listened to the album and the more I realized how it bookended with Black Noise, the more I came to appreciate it. But, I'm going to say something maybe a little bit unpopular, and I could do without this track being on the album. But what about you guys?
Yeah, it feels a little like here's the obligatory intro track, And even Black Noise, we'll get to that later, but I felt a little bit like, well, it's just the end of While I'm Still Here. It's not necessarily a separate track in itself. But, at the same time, I think we all miss the soundscapey instrumental tracks and that kind of thing, so it is nice to have this kind of thing. And the thing that makes it the most interesting to me is that I don't think of Copy of as like a fast, energetic song, but Eater of Dreams makes it sound like one. Like Eater of Dreams is so slow and creeping that when Copy of kicks in, it's like, oh wow, now this album has some energy.
Yeah,
I wouldn't think that about that song.
It seems like it's picking up pace. Yeah, I agree with you completely.
Yeah.
I've heard other theories where people are like, at the end of the Downward Spiral, he's committing suicide or about to commit suicide or whatever they're saying, and then he's waking up from a coma or like a failed suicide attempt, and those are the kind of the noises, like the tinging and the noises that you hear, the bleeps and the bloops are like kind of making medical equipment sort of sound.
Right. Interesting.
Oh, I didn't think of waking from a coma for Eater of Dreams, but I just thought it was about waking from a nightmare. Then we go through the whole progression of the album, and then Black Noise, we're going into the same nightmare, only it's worse this time.
Right.
So, it's going to be difficult to discuss this all in the proper sequence, isn't it?
Yeah. I do think at the end what he's saying, I listened to it a few times, I think he's saying, "We're going black, ain't coming back," which I think is a reference to his first sexual experience with a black man, and I think that's worth celebrating. It's very positive.
Yeah, he's coming out.
Yeah,
coming out right in plain sight.
New theories being espoused all the time. Now, Brian, you said you had a solid 40 minutes.
40 minutes.
To regale us.
Well, to talk about Eater of Dreams, I think we need to go back to a little small town in western Pennsylvania called Mercer in the mid-'60s. And
I would just like to clarify for the benefit of the listeners, this will not actually be 40 minutes long. I am drawing a line in the sand
Director's cut.
Yeah.
But move on.
Yeah, that's it for that track. That's all I have to say.
Hey, what?
I don't actually have.
You meant 40 seconds. You meant 40 seconds.
30 to 40 seconds.
Oh, okay. We can.
It's all
we can
about
move on.
Trent Reznor and sexual explorations with black people.
Okay, I can accept that. I think that's a good place to move on from. Moving on to Copy of A, which I always want to say is Copy of A and always have to stop myself. This was the song that really got me excited for this album because I liked Came Back Haunted when it first debuted, but it didn't perhaps really grab me and make me say, oh my god, new Nine Inch Nails, this sounds great. It was just like, I kind of had a similar view to, I think, what Brian said. Like, okay, this is a Nine Inch Nails single. I like it. I'm not in love with it. But Copy of A, I really was just blown away by it live and like it even more as the studio version. And I'll let someone else talk.
Yeah, I completely agree. Like, nothing against Came Back Haunted, but I think Copy of A probably should have been the first single, but not to go off on a tangent, Nine Inch Nails they've always picked singles that I've just been like, why didn't they pick another song off the album? Why didn't they pick this?
The Day the World Went Away.
Well, yeah, that's one that people throw out, but like ever since The Fragile, it's been every time it's the Hand That Feeds, the beginning of the end, like just basic survivalism even in there. But
right.
Yeah, other than that,
I think it's frustrating, too, because you talk to your friends who only know Nine Inch Nails from the radio, and they're like, yeah, we heard that new single, and whatever. You know, and you're
sounds
like, God,
sounds like the old one.
Right. If All Time Low was the single or one of these tracks, you know, your friends would be like, oh, my God, that band you like is kind of amazing. You'd be like, I know, right? But anyway, Copy of Us is what we're talking about, not Came Back On. Yeah, I totally was excited by this song, too. I thought the live version of it was great, and then the studio version was really cool. I really appreciate the after effects, you know, on his voice and everything being relevant to what the song is about, making it sound like he is a copy of a copy, that kind of thing. Strangely enough, it reminds me of Welcome to the Jungle, the guitar solo where the guitar sounds like bombs falling. And I always thought, like, oh, how cool. They made something that's musically interesting, but that also is relevant to the song that we're listening to. So, yeah, the song had me really excited. I still like it. I still listen to it a billion times. The line, always my intention, your attention, I think is a really cool line, and one of the first quotable lines from the album for me where I'm like, that's awesome. That could be in a Wave message if this was 15 years ago.
That was a standout line for me as well.
Also, I wanted to say that with the repeating of the lyrics, there's this thing that's called transient global amnesia. I don't know if you've ever heard of it. It's like, well, it's just amnesia, but when you have like amnesia and you're coming back from something, you're kind of he discusses it throughout the song. You have this ability to recall. You have this ability where you can't recall who you are or what happened to you in the recent past, and sometimes your memories completely disappear. But his view is distorted. I don't know. It's like the way he's repeating himself. It just seems that he's trying to, I can't even come up with the words, but he's like trying to remember who he was,
right,
as
he's waking up from what he had just done.
So that's interesting, because I hadn't thought of it that way at all. Okay, not to be too precious about it, but I did want to tie in some of these songs to parts of the Downward Spiral that might be relevant, since in the lead up to this album we were told that it ties into the Downward Spiral. And I see Copy of A as kind of being like the counterpart to Mr. Self-Destruct. Whereas in Mr. Self-Destruct, he's saying, you know, I am this horrible, awful thing, but, you know, for better or for worse, I know who I am. With Copy of A, he's saying, I'm not necessarily horrible. Actually, I'm not sure what I am, period.
Right.
So it's like we've lost that sense of persistent self-loathing, but at the same time, it's like, okay, I don't hate myself, but what is me exactly?
Yeah.
Am I anything at this point?
Yeah,
go ahead.
Sorry, with Nine Inch Nails, there's always this underlying inner conflict and like this voice inside of his head, so it's like it definitely relates to Mr. Self-Destruct.
And I think I think there's also the interesting Fight Club connection, where, you know, he says when you have amnesia, everything's a copy of a copy of a copy. And that's what a lot of people think that this song is inspired by that line, which is perfectly possible. But it's that same sort of character, the character who doesn't know who he is. He's not necessarily down on himself. He's just kind of lost in the middle of nowhere, you know, and he needs something to kind of pull him out of it.
Yeah, also, I think there's a kind of meta level of this song, too, where he's saying in the song kind of, you know, well, listen to me, I'm derivative, everything I've said has been said before, and you just imagine, you know, angry rock critics kind of rubbing their hands together with glee, like, bwahaha, he said it.
Right.
We can just quote him directly and give him a bad review.
Right.
But I think he's kind of saying, well, now listen to me, I'm all derivative, and yet the song is like the opposite.
Yeah.
I think that was intentional, to kind of put the song where it's the most obvious that he fears being irrelevant or just being unoriginal, and actually put it to a song that really grabs a lot of people's attention for being different from his past material.
Right. Yeah. And I feel it's similar in that sense to Discipline, which is a song. In my mind, the lyrics of Discipline are, am I still tough enough? Am I still this person that I was when I started this music and everything? And I think I'd much rather hear him sing about his self-doubt and everything than just be like, well, here's a Nine Inch Nails song this is what a Nine Inch Nails song is supposed to sound like, and here's what the lyrics are supposed to be, so here you go,
Which brings us to Came Back Haunted.
There you go.
Although as much as I kind of bagged on this song before, I do like it.
Mm-hmm.
It's just I like it on a different level. Actually, right when the song came out, I was working on a book cover for something, and it was a silly book cover that had like little bats with red eyes flying around. And when the song came out, I actually listened to the song for like three or four times with this big smile on my face, just looking at the images I had drawn of these like little bats with red eyes. Because I was like, it's so perfect. It's like a perfect little Halloween goth sort of song going on. So I do enjoy it on that level. I just do feel like the lyrics are almost written from like a Nine Inch Nails magnetic poetry set. Like you've got there's the thing that's been put inside of Trent. He can't come back, and I just feel like sometimes the simplicity of Trent's lyrics I think actually works in the song's favor because it adds like a universality to it. But sometimes, and I think this song may be one of those cases, it's just like, okay, you could have used some more varied lyrics here to give the song a little more punch.
Right, like here's the interesting thing I came up with, and then here are the filler lines to make the rest of the chorus or whatever. I do love the creepy bass. I think it's amazing. The like bass line that goes throughout the song, and then like the synth after the first chorus that goes with the second verse and everything. Like I love the way the song sounds. It's just the general presentation of the song where it's like, okay. And it ends on stop, which I think like I think we should be done with that by now. To be like, I'm going to say nothing can stop me now, or just can't stop, and that kind of thing, and then end on the word stop because that's when the song stops. It's like, yeah, all right, we get it.
You know what's funny is everybody else just finds that campy and obnoxious, and I'm probably the only person left on Earth who still finds that creepy.
Oh, really?
But he says stop and the song's over. What happened? Did someone hurt him and make the song stop?
Can we talk about the video? What the fuckery?
Oh God.
We certainly can. Although I don't really have much to say about it. I watched it and I was like, well, that was definitely a David Lynch video.
Yeah.
There's definitely dots in it.
It definitely looks like a 12-year-old did some like post-production effects on it.
The lightning bolt. The lightning
bolt. It's funny. On one hand, I think the imagery of the video is amazing, and now I can't hear the song without seeing that weird ballerina with a gas mask spinning back and forth and all that kind of stuff. But on the other hand, David Lynch is probably my favorite filmmaker, and I just think the video is lazy and just seems like somebody who's like, let's film Trent Reznor and then film some crap around my house. Let's
give people seizures and
add some dots and lightning bolts and that kind of thing. And I think as much as I love the general idea of the video, and if I watched any 10 seconds of it, I might think it was great. When I watched the whole thing, I just feel like this wasn't planned out. This was just like you messing around and being like, okay, it's done.
Yeah, I mean, not to compare myself to David Lynch or anything, but it does kind of feel to me like if I had a bunch of clips and I was playing around with a new program and trying to figure out how to make something, like something I would make where I just reused a lot of stuff because I was just trying to make a complete project and see how it all worked together, rather than actually having a wealth of material to choose from.
Right.
But I guess, we can probably talk a bit more in depth about Nine Inch Nails videos specifically
another time
on a future episode. Does anyone else have anything to say about Came Back Haunted?
Good.
Yeah. At the end, as the music's rising, the old refrains from TDS that you hear, I can't remember exactly the chords. I think it's almost a duplication of the chords, but I just wanted to point that out. I found that very interesting. But I enjoyed how it does that. It came back haunted, obviously, but.
See, I'm confused about that because ever since that song came out, people have been talking about the chord, that series of chords in the Downward Spiral, and how that apparently repeats on other parts of Hesitation Marks, and I really can't hear it. It makes me feel bad. But I should have said this during my intro. By the way, I am not very well versed in music theory or the history of music or anything of that nature. I am really just a fan. I'm trying to educate myself more lately, but I just relate to the music as a fan, so I can't talk very much about, melody or harmony or chord progression or, I do the best I can.
It's not the same, it's just changed up slightly. It's like distorted almost.
Okay, maybe someday I'll hear it, and then it'll be like a breakthrough where I'll understand. I'll finally understand music. Yeah. Okay. Moving on to Find My Way, which is a track that surprised me because it didn't really do much for me when it first debuted on the festival tour, but when I went back to it this morning, actually, to give the album another listen and jot down some notes, I realized I think this is the song that actually has the most direct ties to the Downward Spiral, but I'll let you guys chime in on that before I get into that. Chime in on the song, I mean.
I love the song. It's very minimalist, and it's sort of one thing I love about I Would For You and Various Methods of Escape is that they're sort of similar. They're more romantic, they're more mellow, but they're so dirty and so kind of scary sounding for the subject matter, and I really like that juxtaposition. And I think Find My Way is the release of that. Instead of being that, it's just, no, this is just, the song is what it is. We don't need to do any stuff to it. I mean, there's some great soundscapes and stuff, but it's more just let's focus on these words and not get in our own way, kind of.
Yeah, the Downward Spiral too, the underlying ambient tone of the Downward Spiral, you can also hear that somewhere in the music, like underlined, and then there's some sort of tribal chants.
Yeah.
It reminded me a lot of Head Like a Hole. I don't know why.
Oh,
what?
Yeah.
There's some sort. I don't know why, but just the tribal chants reminded me of Head Like a Hole when I first listened to it.
Okay, note to self, listen to Find My Way again, find Head Like a Hole, tribal chants.
Well,
Because I'm totally lost right now.
The video version of Head Like a Hole that starts with some...
Yeah.
I would say the video version's not the studio version. It has that kind of that chanting or
It's like
something.
a remix. It's like a Head Like a Hole remix somewhere out there. It sounds exactly like it, or sounds not exactly like it, but very similar.
Right.
Kind of reminds me of it in a way. But I agree with you. With the lyrics and the feel of it is juxtaposed with the darkness of the music. I think it's probably one of his most honest songs that he's ever written.
Yeah.
And confident too, because I think it takes a certain amount of confidence to have a chorus that is basically just a moan. I mean, he's done choruses before that are screams, but this is just kind of like a
right.
Which I'm actually not criticizing that. I think it works, but not something I think we would have seen him do in the past.
Yeah, definitely.
Agreed.
And every time I hear, I love the bridge, the please, I never meant for this, the falsetto, which he uses falsetto a few times in the album, which I love every time he does.
Yes.
But then at the very end, I want him to say, I have been to every place, I have been to everywhere, I have fucked everyone in the world, I have done something that matters. The first time I heard it, I was like, oh my god.
One could only hope. But yeah, and I enjoy the remix also.
Oh yeah.
It's very it's almost, I almost like it better than the original version almost, but
yeah, if the original is the minimalist version, the remix is like, let's throw all organs and strings and go crazy.
Let's make this pretty.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've listened to the remixes. I've only listened to them a couple of times each because I just wanted to focus on the album. Mm-hmm. The vanilla album, or for lack of a better word. But did either of you have any thoughts about the references to God or higher power in this song? Like, what do you think maybe it's meant by that?
If it was only once on the album, I would think it was it's just a phrase, God forgive me, or Lord whatever, but the fact that it happens a few times, I don't really have any thoughts, because I think you can take anything, and if you're religious, you can make it be religious for you, and you can take anything that is religious if you're not, and make it be secular for you. So I don't really think anything of it, but I do think it's interesting, and I wonder if there's a intention behind it. Yeah.
Well, I think also with him being a recovering alcoholic, when you're a member of AA or anything like that, I am not, but there's a high. It's not very religious, but there's this high spirituality that they tend to congregate towards, and it's very like they use the Lord, and they use the Lord's prayers to end their meetings and things like that. I believe that maybe spiritually he's growing, I suppose.
Right.
Okay, well, the reason why I bring it up is because this is trying to think about what that meant is what brought me back to the Downward Spiral and songs like Heresy and Ruiner, which seem to be kind of this seething anger at God and at organized religion. And I feel like with the religious language on this album, and in Find My Way in particular, it's kind of acknowledging that maybe what he was angry at was never really God.
Right.
Per se, that it was anger at organized religion, it was anger at artifice, it was anger at people being phony, but it wasn't the problem. The root problem was never spirituality or any belief in any particular belief.
Right.
And also what you said about I do not want this. How it ends with how does it end exactly? What are
I've been to every place.
Everywhere.
I've been to everywhere. I'm just trying to find my way. Oh dear Lord, hear my prayer.
Right. I kind of, in my mind, I kind of took that as, I've been everywhere. I have fucked everyone in the world. Blah blah blah. And where did that get me?
Right.
It wasn't so hot.
Right.
Do not recommend.
Yeah. Totally.
So, Find My Way is a deceptively simple song that may have a lot more going on than is immediately apparent.
Yeah.
We're ready to move on?
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay, All Time Low, the song that made Echoing the Sound explode when the album released. Before I had heard the album, I didn't really know what All Time Low was, but I just saw like 15 different people say like, "Oh my God, All Time Low! It's funky! I'm dancing to the funk!" And I was like, "What the hell are they doing?"
I don't think they sell them at Walmart, but I want a fucking Echo Stereo, that's for sure.
Wait, what?
Your voice in fucking Echo Stereo.
Oh,
yeah, I want
right.
a fucking Echo Stereo. I don't know what they are, but I want one.
Let's get.
You want in on that action,
several.
whatever it is.
TM.
I love this song to death. If there's one thing that concerned me, it's I really don't like the kind of rap speak singing that Trent has adopted since With Teeth. Will you bite the hand that feeds you? Or, your world, that is, like that kind of thing. And the verses of All Time Low and Into are on the verge of being like, almost cringeworthy for me. But I think it's also the kind of thing where you hear it the first time and it worries you. But then once you know the context of the song, and it's got that fragile sounding guitar, the guitars that sound like they're from the Fragile, like behind the verses and everything, and I just think, okay, this isn't that much different than something that he would have done back then. So it doesn't bother me, but it's the only thing about this song that I otherwise think is amazing that just made me go uh-oh, and then I like it now. It reminds me of
I would tend.
Go ahead.
I would tend to agree with you about the verses, but to me the chorus pretty much forgives everything.
Yeah, the pre-chorus. I'm sad it only happens once. The shut the goddamn door thing. It reminds me of Beck's Midnight Vultures. If you ever heard that album, which is very...
No, I haven't heard that one. Although, actually, since you bring that up, there's a lot of references to opening and closing doors on this album, and it makes me think that the whole thing is really domestic. Like, I try not to think of the album in terms of what Trent individually is going through all the time, because I think that's kind of a limited interpretation. Like, I think you can enjoy Nine Inch Nails music and get something out of it, even if you don't particularly care about Trent Reznor's history with addiction or whatever.
Totally.
But some parts of this album, I listen to it and I can't help but imagine like a marital spat between like Trent and Mary Queen, where he's like, "I had the door closed. Why did you come in?
Right.
I told you I was going to be writing songs for my new album, and you just had to come in." And
get down on the floor.
But I digress. Where were we?
The beginning of the song reminds me of Chinese Democracy for some reason.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, I don't know what that
is. Which Robin Fink played on.
Yeah. Very. And Buckethead, which I do not know why I mentioned him, but
because Saul Williams was on one of his tracks, and he was produced by Trent Reznor. I got you. Yeah,
like 6 degrees of Trent Reznor.
Right.
With the lyrics, I feel like someone's being enticed. It's very trippy and visceral. The sounds at the end and the music at the end seems like he's being enticed by the voice inside of his head or the drugs or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Although I know Nine Inch Nails lyrics are always open for interpretation, but definitely and it's very Bowie-esque at points, for sure.
Fame, golden years,
the Fame, Golden Years, and even with the lyrics when he mentions that, and it looks as though they're here to stay. That is also a Bowie lyric in "Oh You Pretty Things."
That lyric is also in "Find My Way," by the way, which I wanted to mention. I forgot.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that too.
So it's interesting. 2 songs in a row that sound nothing alike have that same line.
Yeah. So I think those are shout outs. I would imagine they are.
Right.
Let's see. What do you think of the little Final Fantasy prelude music at the end there?
I love it. I love the stretch across the
too.
sky and then the video game music.
Oh yeah.
Now, is that actually Final Fantasy, or are people just saying it sounds like it?
No, I think it sounds a lot like there's something called the prelude, which often there are different versions of the prelude that play on the new game screen on most, if not all, Final Fantasy games, and it does sound kind of reminiscent of the prelude. But I don't even know if Trent is familiar with it. It could very well be a happy accident, because it's not like the prelude is the most original thing ever. But if you play a lot of Final Fantasy, you do have that association stuck in your head.
He's mentioned he plays enough games that I think between him and Rob Sheridan, somebody would have said, hey, let's try to do something similar to this.
Yeah, don't get me wrong, Nine Inch Nails and Nobuo Uematsu, teaming up and doing an album would pretty much, I would just die and go to heaven, so I'm not trying to minimalize the possibility of Final Fantasy influencing Nine Inch Nails. I'm just trying to be realistic.
Totally. One last thing I want to say with this song was, it just makes me think of this whole album. I just think it's so fascinating that, he had his drug thing in the early 2000s, or he cleaned up from it then, and then I think we've all been kind of hot and cold with the albums that happened since then, and now 5 albums later, he's finally like, you know what, let's talk about it. And it sort of feels to me like albums like Year Zero is a separate thing, but with Teeth in the Slip we're a little bit more like, okay, let's just try to make what this should sound like. And this album, there's just so many things, just give me a little baby, just something to get by, like how do we get so high, all this kind of stuff, where I think wow, it's 12 years later, but it feels like for the first time he's like, I'm ready to discuss this. And I think I agree with you, Karen, that you should be able to appreciate any song out of context in a vacuum, but I think for us who know what the history is, and for most people who are listening to this album, it's really heartening to hear him sort of say, now I'm ready to talk about it.
Right. I guess we're ready to move on to Disappointed, which is one of the songs I really was not taken with upon first listen, but is now starting to grow on me a little more. I think I like the idea of what I think the song is about more than I like the actual sound of it, and which is not to say it's bad. It just hasn't grabbed me like a lot of the others have. Other thoughts?
I feel the same. I feel it's simple and it's like 5 minutes long, where I feel like maybe if it were more interesting or shorter, I would like it more. And I like it just fine. I have nothing against it, but yeah, it just feels like compared to most of the other tracks in the album, it's like, okay, it's fine,
Yeah, I agree. I agree. It's but I did at this point. I started noticing the variety of the vocals, and I started to really appreciate that he was actually singing certain things instead of just screaming or talking about them like he normally does. Mm-hmm. But
yeah, Trent Reznor seems to have a real love-hate relationship with singing, which I've been aware of and frustrated by for 2 decades. Because so it seems very often when he does his best singing, he tries to bury it in production, or times where he really should sing, then he doesn't sing. I don't know. I've never quite been able to wrap my mind around it, but he does do a fair amount of singing on this album, which I appreciate.
Yeah.
And I did notice something in this song that I haven't seen it mentioned anywhere. About the 5-minute mark, there's some whispering, and I can't make it out at all. And it's not in the lyric sheet or anything like that. It sounds. I tried to listen into it over and over. It sounds like maybe Pop-Tarts are delicious or something like that. I have no idea. I don't know if it's subliminal. You have to listen. It's about 5. It's like 5:01 to be exact.
Interesting. I just downloaded the audio file version too, so it's possible the mix is a little friendlier for that.
Yeah,
so I'll listen to it in my big headphones to see if I can get anything.
Okay, I'll go back to it and listen to it and report back and see if I hear the subliminal message to get you to buy more Pop-Tarts.
Yeah, cherry Pop-Tarts, I think.
What I do like about this song is I think the theme of disappointment. The title is disappointment. So it's not like my figuring out that's a theme. It's any great work of deduction on my part.
Right.
But going back to the downward spiral again, I think this is kind of about the danger of getting what you want, actually going all the way back to something I can never have. I think he kind of got what he thought he could never have, and he's still wait a minute, this is all there is,
Yeah.
I thought if I was sober, if I got married, if I had kids, if I was respected, then all these problems would evaporate and things would be great, and yet I still have really bad days. What's going on here? And I think I guess that's really resonant to me because I've had feelings like that myself lately. I mean, my life trajectory has been very different from Trent Reznor's, but I mean, I got married a year ago. I just celebrated my first anniversary.
Congratulations.
And thanks. And been able to do a lot of things I didn't think I would be able to do. And it just, but then when you still have days when you're feeling bad, you're like, well, you know, what the hell is wrong with you? This is what you never thought you'd be able to have these things, and now you have them, and you're still not happy. Like, what the hell did you expect? So it kind of makes me wish I liked the song more just simply on a musical level, because on a lyrical level, it's probably one of the most personally resonant to me.
Interesting.
So everything then?
The song that broke the internet.
Because, hey, everything is not okay.
Yeah, there you go.
Even Trent knows it's not okay.
I like that someone referenced that everything is the opposite of nothing, which was, you know, the Nine Inch Nails buzzword in the 90s. And I sort of had never thought of that. It seemed so obvious, but I'm like, oh, interesting.
Yeah, it seems really obvious. I hadn't thought of that either. When this song first came out, I mean, I kind of enjoyed watching the internet explode over it. I didn't really like it, but I didn't really dislike it. I was really just totally neutral on it. But I think I enjoyed the song's existence just for the fact that it made everybody go so nuts.
Right.
But now that the novelty has kind of worn off, I think I'm in the doesn't really like it very much camp.
I've enjoyed it more.
Oh, really?
Yeah, me too.
Please enlighten me.
All right. First off, like, the biggest complaint was about the lyrics. The vocals, that everybody was complaining about them. All the layering of the vocals and how poppy it sounded and how poppy it begins off. But even in All Time Low, I feel like his voice is even being poppier than it is here. I don't understand the difference, or why people are so against this song as opposed to other songs that sound just as poppy. I
think All Time Low has more of a like Nine Inch Nails backdrop to it.
Even though
the lyrics, you know, so it's sort of a nicer, it's handed to you on a nicer plate versus yeah.
But then even with the choruses, it's definitely in everything. The choruses are very much Nine Inch Nails, I believe, and there's still that tension of the music and the choruses, and the lyrics remind us that it's still like Nine Inch Nails, even though the verses are somewhat a little bit corny. Some would say.
You know, I almost wish, I'm probably in the minority here, but I almost wish this song had gone one way or the other. Either be totally like fun Beach Boys pop, and you can be like, oh my god, I can't believe Nine Inch Nails released this song, or be in line with the rest of the album, because I guess it just seems like it doesn't quite know what it wants to be to me. And also, I have an issue with the vocals that the Pitchfork review, which came out today, mentioned that the vocals in the song sound strained, and even though the Pitchfork review is generally a huge pile of crap, I have to agree with them on that point. I think there is like a little bit of a harshness to the vocal here, which doesn't, I can't put my finger on what it is, but I'm pretty sure Trent could have sang it better and chose not to. I don't know.
Yeah, I think
it's done on purpose for sure.
Yeah, I love the voice cracking on like the word survived right off the bat. It just sounds raw to me, you know, and I can see how that could be distracting, but for me, I like it.
That's an issue for me. That was an issue for me going back to With Teeth when All the Love in the World came out, and you've got some really beautiful singing on that song, and then you've got some songs where his voice cracks a lot, and I know it's intentional and I know it's meant to be raw, but like there's a part of me that wants Nine Inch Nails to be pretty, and I just can't wrap my mind around it.
Yeah, what's funny is it definitely sounds like something off of With Teeth almost more than it does with any other song on this album. It sounds like it could be off of With Teeth.
Karen, you were saying something that I wanted to piggyback on about that you wish the song kind of went one way or the other, you know, and that's like I love the song as an individual piece. I've grown to like. I mean, you know, my first response was what the hell, but my two complaints about it are not so much about what the song sounds like as one. When I first heard it, I thought this song does not belong on an album called Hesitation Marks with Russell Mills artwork, you know, and I feel like the rest of the album, even though it's dancey and stuff, it sounds like it fits, and this song just feels like, okay, I know you wrote this song for your, you know, as a single, as a greatest hits thing, but that doesn't mean it has to go on the album. And some people are saying that it's a breath of fresh air on the album, and I think that that's a fair point. But for me, it just feels like when the song comes on, I don't dislike it, but I feel like I'm not listening to Hesitation Marks anymore. I'm taking a time out, listening to everything, and then going back in to the album. And then I also feel like, just one quick thing, I also feel like the song is trying to accomplish too much in 3 minutes. That it goes from the poppy to the noisy to then this like epic ending, which I love the end. I love the I Am Free and the video game music again. But it just feels like I almost want this song to be 5 minutes long. I want it to take time to explore all the different facets of it rather than kind of be like, okay, we're this and then now we're this and now we're this and now the song's over. Anyway, back to the album. It just feels a little clusterfucky to me.
Right.
Yeah, like almost forced in there.
Yeah.
I don't know about it being a breath of fresh air on the album necessarily. I mean, I can see that. I just don't know if I really would think of it that way. Mm-hmm. I do think it fits on the album thematically in the sense that we've got a lot of different types of, I guess, denial on this album, particularly in All Time Low. And and so we've got All Time Low, like, you know, let's just have fun, baby, we're never going to die, obviously in denial.
Right.
We've got Everything, which is like, I've survived everything, yay, go me, I'm awesome. You can go suck one. I don't care.
Right, and he says
also denial.
This thing that lives inside of me will surely rise and wake. Like lyrically, it totally fits with what we've been discussing. You know, which we'll get to when we get to N2 as well. This sort of the thing that goes into him and came back haunted. That's kind of living inside him. But it's just musically, it's hard to marry those two things. I think for me.
Okay, so is that enough on the song that blew up the internet?
Yeah, I think so. And we should be seeing an interview or a video in the next day or two here, so that'll be interesting too.
Woohoo! All right, time for Satellite. The song that seems like it might have been intentionally timed, but the timing doesn't make sense, so it has to just be a happy accident.
Right.
All the surveillance stuff in this song could not be more timely at the moment. Well, I guess it could if it came out maybe a month ago, but still.
Yeah, where's our British podcaster? We lost him.
Yeah.
Need to get in the Daily Mail conversation.
You got cut out.
Yeah. They're like, we don't want him to talk.
Love this song. It was one of the real standouts for me.
Yeah. On
my first listen.
Yeah.
I admit to being somewhat puzzled by how it fits into the rest of the album because I feel like thematically this time ties back to Year Zero.
Absolutely.
Because surveillance is a big theme on Year Zero. Even at one point he says in The Great Destroyer, he says something like they're watching us in their shiny satellites something to that effect. So love the song, love the way it sounds, but it doesn't, I wonder if it doesn't fit into the narrative, or maybe it kind of fits into the narrative in a way that I'm just not seeing. I don't know. What do you think?
It is interesting that the two songs that he admitted were singles before he ever thought about making an album are the two that were like, should this be on here? You know, and like it kind of where everything fits lyrically, Satellite fits musically, I think, but they do kind of feel like maybe he wrote those songs and then came up with the concept of Hesitation Marks and wrote the rest more in that vein, and then he kind of was like, well, I guess these still fit on here, and I certainly don't think like this song doesn't take me out of the album at all, but yeah, I do agree that it's like I don't know exactly how it fits either.
Yeah, they're both very distinct in sound, yet they're like equally catchy. It feels like they were supposed to be included on the Greatest Hits album, you know?
Right.
I was going to save all mention of reviews for later, but this is pertinent, so maybe I'll mention it now. Have you read the review of this album by the fellow who does the This Noise Inside My Head 9 Inch Nails blog?
Yes, I have.
Well, his explanation for this song's place in the narrative is that the way an addict has to constantly monitor their own behavior is very much like being monitored by an outside source.
Interesting.
They're being paranoid.
Yeah, so it's a very interesting way of looking at it, and it does kind of reconcile it with the rest of the narrative, but I don't know if that was actually Trent's intention writing it. And of course, you know, I don't want to have a whole death of the author argument. Doesn't even matter what Trent's intent is. Like, that's a whole nother 10 podcasts or whatever, but that is a way of kind of marrying it to the rest of the album if you are so inclined.
Yeah.
And I guess
I also wanted to mention there's the twanging guitar in Satellite. It reminds me a lot of the Big Come Down. I don't know if you've heard it in there.
Yeah, I thought that was All Time Low with the verses of All Time Low.
Yeah, there's a couple of times in the album that you get that twanging guitar from Big Come Down. It's probably more to do with the guitarist. I'm losing.
Well, this is actually this song is 100% Trent Reznor according to the liner notes. Yeah.
So, yeah,
which is interesting because that's what I thought. I was like, oh, is this Baloo or who is this? And it's like, oh no, it's just Trent doing his thing.
Yep.
Okay, so we're good on Satellite for now?
Good.
Yep.
All right, moving on to Various Methods of Escape, which, looking at my notes, I actually yes, I actually took notes. I just drew a little heart because I was trying to analyze the song, and then I decided I didn't want to, and I was just like, too beautiful to analyze, hearts.
Yeah.
After that second chorus and that damn dulcet tone kicks in and Trent starts whispering, like, what does he whisper? I think I could lose myself in here.
Oh, yeah.
That moment and all the way to the end of the song is everything I love about Nine Inch Nails.
Right.
It's just perfectly, and it really kicks off like the finale of the album. It's hard to describe.
Yeah, I didn't have the some people were like the song made him break into tears and everything like that. I didn't have as much as a emotional connection with the song as other people, but I love it and I think it's beautiful and very moving, and very honest too.
Yeah, the drumming at the end reminds me of Dead Souls too, with
okay, yeah, I can hear that.
Elan drumming, yeah.
I'm having, as much as I've listened to this album, I'm having trouble bringing specific parts of it to mind.
It's tricky.
You know what it is?
It's only been out a week. It's not like you've been listening to this for years.
And I think the parts that I really like have kind of dominated my brain, so I don't have room for like every part of every little song.
Right.
Yeah, that'll take some time.
Well, it's also interesting because almost every song on this album has like verse, chorus, and then like 3 minutes of musical wandering, which I think is great. I love it, but it's also hard to necessarily remember that the song where you remember the chorus so well is also the song where at the end there's this whispering or this video game music or whatever. It's just there's a lot to it.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so I guess we're going to have a rather short segment on Various Methods of Escape because all we agree on, all we can come to a consensus on is it's gorgeous. Everybody wants to analyze it, can just shut up.
We all drew hearts on our albums, so we're all good now.
Exactly. Okay, moving on to Running. Another song I actually don't have very much to say about. I'm curious to see what you guys have to say.
Well, it sounds like if Ghost and Pretty Hate Machine had a love child, I think that would be this song. It's very I would like to see it performed a cappella live or something
right.
Lines like that. But at the end of the song, I could picture Trent Reznor like one of his eyes going lazy, and maybe he's doing some sort of flail dancing because it sounds so much like Tom York. I can't. It just reminds me of Radiohead right at the end there.
Yeah, somebody mentioned Atoms for Peace on this track, and I said, yeah, I can totally see that. And I mentioned in the forum, I think that it's interesting that Tom York and Trent Reznor are very different people from very different backgrounds, but they've both kind of grown in the same direction. Like 2007, Tom York released The Eraser and Trent released Year Zero, and they were both albums that they made entirely on their computers. And I was like obsessed with these albums, and I just thought they were so good. And they still they love working with bands and all that kind of stuff. But it's just interesting that they both kind of went to the same place from very, very different origin places.
Great minds and all that.
Yeah, there you go. I really don't have much to say about this track. I think it's fun. It sticks in my head. That's a weird thing about this album that I'm not sure if it's a good thing or a bad thing yet. I'll wake up like singing. I'll wake up like in my first thought I have in the morning is like I'm running out of places. And I'm like
I'm running out of my house. I'm running out
right.
of the car.
And that doesn't. I don't know that that's happened with Nine Inch Nails albums for me before, so I'm worried that means in 2 months I'll be like, fuck, I can't listen to this track anymore, but I'm hoping that doesn't happen. And the other thing is I really love the whispering when he's like, running, that thing, because I just feel like it's very untamed, it's very raw on an album that sounds very put together and very thought through. Yeah, exactly. And it reminds me of Discipline, where he's like, am I still tough enough, that kind of thing, where he allows for a little bit of breathing room instead of just being like, here's exactly how this has to sound, which I think is refreshing.
Yes.
Right. I don't have a whole lot to say about this song musically, other than I also find it catchy and it sticks in my head. But I guess I do find it interesting that the whole idea of running out of places to escape, again, in the context of the Downward Spiral, which is apparently our drinking game for this podcast. Every time I say that, take a drink. the Downward Spiral is all about running away from yourself, and I think the idea of running out of places to hide at that point would have been beyond terrifying. And yet, in this one, he's saying, I'm running out of places to hide, and he seems kind of resigned to it. Like, it's not a scary song. It's more of a, well, this is a thing that is happening. Yeah. That's a shame.
And what's interesting is the lyrics on the album, it's, I'm running out of places I can hide from this, running out of places I can hide from this. I'm running out of ways to keep on hiding this. I'm running out of places that I can hide from this. And then the second time, it's switched, so it's 3 of the second thing I said and 1 of the other one. And I think that totally fits in context with what you're saying. Like, it's more reflective than scared. It's like I'm running out of ways to keep on hiding this. I can't do this anymore, and I'm coming to terms with that rather than holy shit, what the fuck.
Rather than lamenting it in a loud scream.
Exactly.
Okay, are we good? We're done with running for now?
Good.
Done running.
Okay, moving on to I Would For You, which I do have something to say about. Yay!
Oh.
Yay.
This is one of those, sometimes Trent goes for this style in his vocals and his production that I guess I'm going to call, like, desperation coolness. Like, tries to make a song sound so desperate that it kind of passes this desperation event horizon and sounds cool. And it works for some people or in some songs, but it doesn't work for me. Like, I never liked We're in This Together Now from The Fragile. I just felt like it was too desperate and just didn't, something about it didn't work. I feel like with this song, it's kind of a similar approach, but the song has a strong enough hook to sustain it. And I realize as I'm saying this that this may sound crazy. This may sound like it's coming out of nowhere, but that was just what I thought when I was listening to the song and taking notes, that it's got a desperation to it that I think works.
Mm-hmm.
So you're basically saying this is the song that Stabbing Westward always wanted to write, is what you're saying?
That's exactly what I'm saying.
Okay. No, I enjoyed it. It has like a New Order vibe mixed with the Fragile. So I enjoy that, and I like the crunchy bass in it. I don't know how to describe it, but I'd say crunchy.
Yeah, I call it the growly bass in my notes.
Yeah, it sounds crunchy to me, and I enjoy the hell out of that.
And I think it works against the subject matter, like I was saying earlier. This song, in various methods, just like it, it's not Find My Way. It's not just here's a very simple thing. It's kind of disturbing. There is a tension, but it's also positive, and it's nice for the song to have that much going on, rather than be like, here's what the song is, and let's just ride that single wave. Like, let's kind of explore these feelings, because it's a positive song in the sense that the chorus is very, I mean, not positive, but sort of romantic and whatever.
Yeah, love song.
But then there's also a lot of self-doubt, what a pathetic string of words, all that kind of thing, that I think that's more representative of what you go through. It's not just, hey, you're great. It's you're great and I'm shitty and everything's shitty, but things can be better, and there's just, I like that there's so many different moods going on in the song, because it makes it more interesting, for lack of a better word.
Yeah, and this is one of those songs that makes me think of a marital spat. Like the opening line
right.
that Trent says, such a pathetic string of words. I imagine he's just like trying to write song after song, and just balling up the little pieces of paper and throwing them behind him.
Right.
And his wife walks in, she's like, why are you throwing away your songs, dear? And he's like, don't touch that. You're not meant to see that.
Just leave them lying on the floor. The warning posted on the door. Shut the goddamn door. We just need to write let's do a comic with lines. Yeah, play.
Well, I always just think Year Zero could be a musical, but that's another podcast.
There you go.
What else is there to say about I Would For You?
One thing I love is when he says, the second time he says, I only have myself to blame, and then the chorus kicks in. I really like, he's done that a couple times. He did it on All the Love in the World, and I think, and All That Could Have Been, where it's like we don't need to hear that last word. If in All That Could Have Been, or All the Love in the World, it's like if you say I've become a million miles, like we know what the rest of the thing is, and it's kind of interesting to interrupt yourself and almost be like, I shut the fuck up, let's move on to the next thing. Like there's something raw and I think kind of powerful about that to me.
But What's interesting about that to me is, and thank you for bringing that up because I wanted to mention that earlier, is as much as I like this album, there are a lot of very self-referential things on it, as though Trent knows he's writing a lot of this for an audience of Nine Inch Nails fans like us who have been listening to his stuff for decades now, who kind of know all of his lyrical motifs and things to the point where he doesn't have to finish a thought because we know what the thought is.
Totally.
And it's like, on the one hand, that's really interesting, but on the other hand, I wonder if it ever crosses a line where it just gets maybe too self-referential, and I'm asking that as a rhetorical question. I really don't have an opinion on it.
Well, one thing I thought was interesting, it reminds me of what I loved about Ghosts when it came out, was that I felt like it was written in the musical language of Nine Inch Nails. Like, I felt like for those of us who've been listening to Nine Inch Nails for 15 years at that point, like, we understand what all these scratches and noises and hums are. Like, it makes sense to us.
Yeah, it's familiar to us.
Right. It's hard to take some of those tracks. I mean, some of the tracks are beautiful and you can play it for anybody, but it's hard to take some of those tracks and play it for somebody who's not a fan because it'll be like, there's too much happening for me to understand what I'm listening to. But for us who are sort of not in the know, that sounds silly, but you know what I mean. Like, we listen to it and we're like, oh yeah, this makes sense. I understand why there's a song that is mostly made up of scratches and beats and noises, because that sounds like what I would expect from a Nine Inch Nails instrumental album. And I think that there's similar things like that, which hopefully work for the outsider, the casual listener, but I think for us it's very rewarding to be like, oh yeah, we know what you're doing here. We've been here before with you, and we appreciate that you're letting us in again. So to speak.
All right, so I guess that's just something to keep in mind going forward. Like, at what point are the references serving the audience as in the entire audience, meaning even people who are new to Nine Inch Nails, and at what point is it just kind of like a little like Easter egg for the fans sort of deal?
Right, totally.
All right, so we are up to
Into.
I am quite flummoxed by this song, actually. I like it a lot, but I keep going all over the place about what I think the meaning is. Like, I hear a lot about, like, childbirth and having children in here, but the thing is, that could be where I am in my life that I'm thinking of it that way, and there are plenty of lyrics to the song that don't mesh with that. So, what do you guys think? Because I'm at a loss.
I think the song is totally in the vein of, this album. There's this recurring theme of this thing being inside of you, and Came Back Haunted. He says it's in here. Its eyes are, its mouth, lips are red, smile is red, and its eyes are black, or whatever. I don't think I'll be coming back. And I think that Into is sort of the conversation about trying to separate your id from your real self. He says, have to purge what you were. Yes, of course, this is going to hurt. And I just think the song is kind of a meditation on not being able to tell the two of you apart. The good part of you, the good side and the evil side, so to speak. The side of you who's still haunted, the side of you who's still stuck in that scary place, and the side of you who is positive and who's trying to live a normal life. And I think that's what we were talking about a couple songs ago of trying to, everything. I think it was Disappointed, where we said, like, oh yeah, everything should be fine now, but it's still not. You're still haunted. You're still trying to find your way. You're still, to use the song references as what I think where they fit in this.
Yeah, it seems like the recurring theme of the album for sure. I think it's probably the closest we get to this album sounding anywhere near the Downward Spiral.
Yeah.
Also with the Buckingham and the Baloo guitar at the end of the song are so fantastic, and the way it ends so abruptly, it might be my favorite Nine Inch Nails segue of all time, actually.
Yeah. And this is one of the, these, as the album goes on, the songs start to bleed into each other more. Where early on it's very much, okay, song done, next song, and then at the end it starts to become a little bit more of this one big piece kind of.
Yeah, and I hear what you're saying about the duality. I guess for me personally, I kind of wish it was about something else, and I don't really know why. I think maybe in my own mind I'm trying to take the album to a different place than it's meant to go. I don't know, but I think it may take a lot of listens for me to really for my opinion on the song to kind of crystallize.
Right.
But
certainly one of the most complex songs in the album in terms of just everything that's going on in it musically and lyrically.
Oh,
yeah, I love the nature is violent part. I wish there was more of that.
Oh my God, the robot voice.
Yeah,
This song, there are, I think, 6 songs in the album where they remind me of each other. Satellite and Running, I feel like, are both very dancey. Various Methods and I Would For You are positive songs that are still dirty. And then Into and All Time Low are both kind of funky songs that have like the rap singing. And then they both have an amazing pre-chorus thing that then never comes back the rest of the song. And I don't know if I think that's brilliant or if I think it's frustrating that you never hear. Yeah, like All Time Low has the Shut the Goddamn Door, and this has the Nature is Violent robot voice, and I'm just like, God, I want to hear more of that, but at the same time, I'm just like, well, I just need to listen to the song again then.
Yeah, I'm going to err on the side of brilliance rather than frustrating, because, if you heard those things several times, then by your umpteenth listen to the album, you'd be like, I used to think this was cool.
Yeah, it'd be like Transformers, whereas Michael Bay, you see one robot run into a building, and they're like, that's cool, but then you see it 50 times, and
right.
This movie's shit.
Yes, very well said, especially with the robot voice.
Okay. So is that all we have to say about the mysterious Into for now?
Pretty much, yeah.
Yep.
Okay, then that brings us to While I'm Still Here, the last proper song on the album, where I did not draw a heart in my notebook, but if I did, it would have been a heart that encompassed an entire piece of loose leaf paper. Like a little heart would not have been enough.
Right.
This song did not stand out to me on the first listen or two, but the last couple of times I listened to the album, I was just so struck by just the raw beauty of this song, and it's so beautiful.
Yeah, I like to call it the most.
You guys talk.
I like to call it the most hopefully depressed song I've ever heard.
Yeah.
It's
interesting. He said, well, the song ends on a positive note, which I did because it's uncomfortable. It's not what I would usually do. I feel like Find My Way is probably the generic Nine Inch Nails album closer, but I feel like that would be a little unexciting, and I feel like this song is more, but I don't feel like it's an overly positive song. I feel like it's like, hey, everything's fucked, but let's use the time we have left, even though we have all this regret. And I feel like that's totally in the Nine Inch Nails wheelhouse of In This Twilight or Great Below of sort of. I think it's not so defeatist anymore as much as it's like, okay, the past is the past, but let's like I said, like use the time we have left. And yeah, I love it. I think it's a more appropriate album closer than something like Find My Way would be, because it's more complicated and there's more to it, and it leaves you. I think it leaves you with the when you see like a Coen Brothers movie and the credits start and you're just like, I don't want to move or talk to anybody or think for the next few minutes. I just need to digest what's happening, and I feel like that's how I feel like with this song, rather than be like, okay, the album's basically over and whatever.
Yeah, should we discuss the elephant in the room?
Oh, what's that?
Wish.
The sax.
Oh, the sax.
Well, I think the role of the sax is very clear in the song. It's, look, the point is we're all eventually going to die, and it sucks. So if we're all going to die, at least let's play the fucking saxophone
let's dance.
first.
Let's be happy.
I love it. I mean, it's not some funky jazzy solo. It's just like some honks that are kind of, as much as you're like, oh, it's a saxophone, they don't sound pretty. It's a little. I don't know. I don't think it sounds out of place at all to me.
No, definitely not. And the bass with it, also the Palladino's bass in there sounds amazing.
Yeah. And this song stirs, maybe more than anything else in the album, this song stirs emotions in me that I find it difficult to verbalize, which is bad for a podcast, but probably good in terms of appreciating a piece of music.
Right, absolutely.
I mean, I think I'll probably be listening to the song for a very long time and not get tired of it, because I'm still trying to kind of work my way through that enigma. And
when I said Wish earlier, it's because the song is abbreviated as WISH, which is going to be complicated in the forums from now on. But the other fascinating thing for those of you who have your album in hand now is that the song borrows lyrics from a Hank Williams song.
Yeah.
So he says, the Hank Williams song says, all that might have been. Watch young lovers walking by, God forgive me if I cry. And I just think the song is called Weary Blues from Waiting, which I think is appropriate. But I'd be fascinated to hear, hopefully someone in an interview asks him where the hell that... I mean, this is the guy who quoted Carly Simon on The Fragile, but but still, it's just sort of like, what on earth made you say, like, this old country and western song, I need... The best way I can say what I'm going to say is to borrow these lyrics. I think it's great, and I love it. And Watch Young Lovers Walking By seems like a very out-of-place Nine Inch Nails lyric, but it's also what makes the song more complicated and makes it feel more honest and raw to me.
Well, probably reading into it too much, but I think of, Watch Young Lovers Walking By, and it's like, well, think of all the time that they still have, those young lovers who are 18. And I think that's a very appropriate sentiment for this song.
Right.
So, okay, are we done orgasming over the song?
I think so. Hold on a second.
Right. Almost. Oh, there we are.
Yep, there it is. All right.
All right. Just wanted to make sure we were all on schedule. Okay. That brings us to Black Noise, which I was like, oh, well, here's the token instrumental. Okay, it's okay, when I first listened to the album. But the more I sort of bought into the idea of the beginning of the album being awakening from a nightmare and then the end of the album going back to it, the more I liked it, because there's such a strong sense of impending dread in this song, and it's almost heartbreaking coming off of While I'm Still Here too, because it's almost like you've reached this beautiful place of like humble acceptance, and it's like, but the nightmares are still there, and guess what, they're getting worse, and guess what, there's no peace.
Right.
So it's kind of horror movie-esque.
They're still lingering and just waiting for you, it seems like. That's what I was getting from it. There's a lot of like, I'm getting towards a place of happiness, and now there's still this thing lingering in my head.
Yeah. I think...
And actually, go ahead.
I just think that's what keeps this album from feeling like, it's the token I've had babies now, and now my music is going to just be happy and positive, is the fact that, like Black Noise at first, I was like, why is this even a separate track? It's just, Hurt ends with a minute and a half of noise. Why can't While I'm Still Here? But then, because there is Eater of Dreams, and it's like a nice bookend, and if you look at those two tracks individually, it's like Eater of Dreams is very simple and electronic and minimalist, and then Copy of a Came Back Haunted, Find My Way are all pretty simple songs, and then by the end of the album everything is so noisy and complicated, and there's so much going on that it's sort of just musically the album takes this journey from being calm and quiet and I think I have a handle on this to at the end where it's just like you said, everything is fucked, and it just has this absolute tension and kind of almost despair and fear to it, and I think it doesn't make the album as a whole negative as much as it just adds another layer of, okay, it's not just everything is fine now and I have a grip on it. There's always going to be that that thing that's there that's always going to get worse if you let it, and yeah.
That ends your 40-minute exposition on Black Noise.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I'm about to complain that the Spin magazine review of this album is really pretentious, but now I'm going to be as pretentious as fuck. But this song and the whole feel of this album actually reminds me of Milton's Paradise Regained.
Okay.
When the whole point of it is that at the very end, all Paradise Regained really says is, yeah, you know how uncomfortable it is to keep standing and keep trying, and yeah, well, keep doing that for your entire life until you die. That's the point.
Right, totally. Sisyphus happy.
But I also really like Black Noise just as a track name, because if you think about what White Noise is, it's just kind of innocuous.
Mm-hmm.
So this is like the opposite of that, like background noise that's like it's eating away at your soul.
Right.
It also rhymes with Black Boys, which brings us full circle.
And now we've tied it all together.
The theory has come full circle.
Just one thing I want to say is that it was funny when the album names came out, the track listing, and I was like, Eater of Dreams, Black Noise, All Time Low, like they kind of sounded like here's our strobe light April Fool's album, like this is what you would call a Nine Inch Nails song. But then again, when they
like Manson tracks.
Yeah, exactly. If I was your vampire, you're like, really? You actually did that? But yeah, at the same time, I think it's like a lot of concerns about the album. Once you hear it, it's just sort of like, oh, sure, that's fine, and you don't. It might bug you if you didn't like the songs as much, but because you do, you're just like, okay, great, that's perfectly normal. If that makes sense.
Okay, so I had another thought about Black Noise, and I'm sure it was like the most brilliant thought in the history of music criticism. I'm just looking at my notes, blah 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 blah. Okay, obviously it wasn't that brilliant because I didn't write it down, so whatever. Who cares? Okay. Obviously, now we've gone through every track on the album. We're not going to go over the remixes because, A, this is getting long, and B, I figured we could probably do that another time.
Sure.
But obviously we're all fans of this album. I thought now might be a good time to kind of go over briefly, where does it rank for you in the Nin discography? Is it your favorite album? Is it in the top 3? That sort of thing. As of now, obviously, because these things can change.
Yeah, it's really tricky to say, like, how am I going to feel about this in a year? But for me, I love it. I think it really sounds like hard work and honest work. I feel like this is really somebody who is being, I know Trent says everything he puts out is always the best he could do at the time and everything, but this just really feels like somebody who spent a lot of time looking inward, and once he knew what he wanted to say, put a lot of effort into layers and getting people to come and help him with it, and doesn't just feel like he just went crazy and put out an album in a month and just said, okay, this is it, I'm done, whatever. It feels like there was a lot of work on it. Ranking for me, it's so hard to say because everything pre-With Teeth, I was a kid. It's very nostalgic. I remember wanting to run away from home and just listening to Broken all the time and being on a trip and listening to the Downward Spiral and over and over and over again. I wouldn't even want to talk to people, so I could just listen to the album. So it's.
And I just want to interject that I realized going into this that ranking is really a very silly exercise.
Of course,
but
yeah.
But this is a podcast. This is what we do,
right.
So.
And I think that it also allows for us to discuss how we feel about the album in the whole oeuvre of what Nine Inch Nails has done. I think if there's anything that I would like to see more of on the follow-up album is I just feel like Downward Spiral and The Fragile just have a lot more mystery to them. Like the songs a lot of times are a lot more wayward, or they'll be uncomfortable and they won't rhyme where you expect them to, and that kind of thing. And this album it's a lot cleaner. It's a lot more, okay, here's the what's that? Yeah, clean cut. Like here's verse, chorus. And as much as there's layers and all that kind of stuff and lyrics that we'll puzzle over for hopefully years to come, I just feel like to me it's fragile at the top simply because there's so much of it and there's so much going on, and it just feels like a mystery that I'll never solve. And then Downward Spiral because it's the classic, and it's very mysterious and soundscapey and whatever. And then we get into this muddled area where it's like I love Hesitation Marks, but Pretty Hate Machine and Broken have such a nostalgia with me that I feel like I don't know. It's not even worth trying to say one is. I would say this album is probably better than those in terms of the work that was done, but in terms of my favorite, it's just so hard to say because of the nostalgia I have with the earlier stuff.
Yeah, that's always a difficult game you sort of play with yourself, trying to tell what album or song might be objectively better, knowing full well that objectivity in music doesn't really exist, but trying to separate it from your nostalgia. You can drive yourself nuts with that,
right.
But I totally understand what you're saying. Jeff, what about you?
Oh, with the album, I think I'm gonna say it's right behind The Fragile and the Downward Spiral. I think it's better than Year Zero and With Teeth right now, but I haven't had the quality time that I've had with all those other records, so I'm sure I will see different things as I go along with it. I think it's a great amalgamation of the history of Nine Inch Nails. It has the perfect blend of like the present and past sounds. And sounds new, but it's still familiar. And it's hard to pick out whatever, like between Eater of Dreams to Black Noise. Every song sounds like it's very familiar, but just different to me.
Isn't that fascinating? Sorry to interrupt, but the fact that this album is so like, oh, this is like a dance album. It sounds like Justin Timberlake. Like people are saying all this stuff at the same time. We're like, oh no, this totally sounds like Nine Inch Nails.
Yeah,
how different it sounds. It just sounds correct. It sounds like, oh yeah, this is expected as much as it's totally unexpected. Sorry to interrupt.
Oh, that's all right. But Nine Inch Nails has been around for like 25 years, so the music to me it feels just as viable as the day when the band was created, which is huge because not many bands that have been around this long most of them sound like they're treading water, but Nine Inch Nails has always sounded viable to me. To me, this is probably the best album since anything done in the Fragile era, I have to say. I think it's definitely one of the top albums of this year. And then the one thing I found with complaints about the album on certain things, I don't have many complaints about it, but there are tons of people out there that always talk about how Nine Inch Nails is not his lyrical content of his albums. It seems like they always are criticizing him. I've never seen any artist more criticized for his lyrics than Trent Reznor has been. Sure, most of them are obscure, rather simple, but that is what makes them so great, you know?
Right.
They're open for interpretation. It gives you more of a chance to connect emotionally with the music if the lyrics aren't directly based on specifics. The guy wrote "Fuck It." He wrote "Fuck You Like an Animal." He's not fucking Shakespeare. You know what I mean? It's not meant to be. I mean, Nine Inch Nails is best when Reznor is being introspective, and the way he fuses his lyrics, vocals, and music is what makes it a band unlike any other. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. When I was growing up, and every time Trent would say he was inspired by another artist, I would want to check out that artist, and I would check out Ministry or something, or Skinny Puppy, and I'd just be like, I don't get this. This is just noise to me, and it takes some time. You have to sit with it for a little while, but I think that's what makes Nine Inch Nails so interesting, is that it's taking that noise and that sound, but it's making it simplified, and I don't mean that in any sort of negative sense as much as I mean like. It's not a Paul Thomas Anderson movie where you're like, I got to sit here for 3 hours and watch this guy, talk to the camera. Like, you want it to be The Matrix, you want it to be American Beauty, you want it to be Fight Club, where it's like, look, we're taking complicated things, but we're paring it down to something that's a little bit more digestible. And I think that's true of the lyrics, and it's true of the music, where there's so much going on. It's not just here's the world I live in, so let's stay here. It's here's the world I'm inspired by, but here's the other world I'm inspired by, and let's just try to make all these things happen at once. And that's hard to succeed at, and I think he totally does it.
I'm going to break with the two of you a little bit and say that Hesitation Marks is, I think, it's the best Nine Inch Nails album since The Downward Spiral.
I'm surprised how many people...
How about that?
Yeah. Surprised how many people don't think that Fragile is just like the extended cut of The Downward Spiral. Like, I just sort of assumed everyone thought, like, if you love The Downward Spiral, you'll love The Fragile even more, simply because there's two of it,
I'm sure there is a Fragile episode coming up where we'll get to hash all this out, but
right.
I do like parts of The Fragile, but I never was the big fan of it that a lot of Nine Inch Nails fans seem to be in general, and I just feel like this album resonates with me more than The Fragile did. It also makes me wonder if I've kind of had Stockholm Syndrome in regard to more recent Nine Inch Nails releases, because, like, for example, I really like The Slip. I like a lot of the songs on that album a lot. But then when I was listening to this, I was like, did I really like The Slip, or did I just convince myself I liked it? I didn't have any better Nine Inch Nails available.
Yeah, it was definitely it.
You've diagnosed it, for sure. Yeah. And also, I don't know how many fans do this, but for as long as I've been listening to Nine Inch Nails, I would always be, like, kind of remixing it in my head and being like, well, it would sound cool if this would happen here, or if this chorus were extended. And once again, reiterating, I have no musical training. I just like telling other composers what to do in my head.
Right.
And I noticed while I was listening to this album, I wasn't trying to rearrange it at all. I was really just taking it in and enjoying it. And I think that's indicative of the fact that, well, it would be kind of arrogant to say, well, Trent's made it the way I like it, so therefore now it's better.
Right.
It's kind of, it's more like the way the way this album flows just kind of aligns more with my personal taste. So it really works for me.
Right.
And I'm just so glad that this Summer of Anticipation ended with such a great album, because can you imagine if after all the months of speculation and everything, the album dropped and we were like, eh.
It was just an album full of everything, and then we were just like, oh.
Right. Yeah, my biggest problem with the album, it's my own fault, but there were, 5 tracks released before the album even came out. And then,
I know,
and then there's
it's kind of weird.
Yeah, and then there's Eater of Dreams and Black Noise. So when you actually get the album, you're like, well, there's really only 7 new songs on here. It feels almost like I listen to the album, and I'm like, okay, let's get through all these tracks I already know so we can get to the other stuff. And it's my fault for listening to it, but I also wish it was Came Back Haunted, and then maybe just the festival songs, and then you didn't get any studio stuff, and then you could be surprised by the studio version of Copaiva for the very first time when you hear the album. And I'm glad we had stuff along the way to keep us entertained. But at the same time, I'm almost like, I remember when I saw Dark Knight in the theater, I was like, I've seen 20 minutes of this movie by now with like clips that have been released online, and I shouldn't have, but I'm not going to not check the stuff out, So I almost wish there was even more even more brand new about the first time hearing this album. But again, my fault.
I don't know, maybe if I hadn't already been kind of primed for it, maybe if I just heard it as a complete Hesitation Marks virgin, it would have just blown my head off. So I don't know.
Right.
Maybe it was better, but the impact was dull.
Right.
Actually, something totally out of left field, but I just wanted to mention it before I forgot. I think whatever Columbia did for the marketing for this album was pretty impressive. It seemed like for a little while, wherever I went on the internet was wallpapered with Hesitation Marks ads.
Well, the thing is, Google, like, the internet knows who you are now. Yeah, I would have to go into the same website under the
aspect to it. But
yeah, I had to go into the same website under the Google Incognito and like go to the same site, and I'm like, okay, there's no ad for it now, so they just know that I am on this website, and they're like, hey, you, in case you didn't already know, and like, you don't know me well enough if you think I don't already know. But yeah, I do agree that the marketing was pretty intense.
Because it's also, it's like there's been interviews in pretty much every major magazine and every major music magazine and so on and so forth. Okay, obviously we've gone on for quite a little while. I did put on the outline here that we were going to discuss the reviews, which maybe we'll just do for 5 minutes and go into it more at a later date. But I did want to mention, for the benefit of the listeners who are not aware of it yet, that there are some interesting reviews out there. One is the Spin Magazine review, which is hilariously pretentious. It's like one of those reviews that name drops like 5 times in every sentence to prove to you that the author knows more about music than you do.
Right.
And, there are people defending it, too, which is interesting to me, because people are saying, oh, I like looking up all those references. I like learning more about music. And you know what? That's cool, but I could give you a list of 50 band names, and maybe you would like all those bands, but that's not the same thing as writing a review.
Right.
So
yeah, totally.
So yeah, if you haven't read the Spin review, do yourself a favor. It's pretty hilarious. Let's see. There was a lot of talk about what the Pitchfork review was going to be like, because Pitchfork famously panned The Fragile years back, and Pitchfork gave it kind of a lukewarm review. They gave it a 7, but sort of seem to be trying to find excuses to trash it, I guess. What quote did I pick out from the Pitchfork review? But unlike the themes of depression, madness, and addiction that defined his most enduring music, Hesitation Marks chronicles a more existential crisis of relevance.
Yeah, what?
Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds to me like they listened to Copaiva and decided that was going to be their narrative thread for their review,
right,
and did not bother to listen to the rest of the album very carefully.
Right.
Which is the problem with music reviews in general, I've noticed. It's like they come up with a narrative. I'm losing my voice. They come up with a narrative to explain the album, which is better than just doing a track-by-track, like-dislike sort of thing. But by the end, I think they sort of come out the other side and stop discussing the album and just get married to this narrative they've created. And probably the most interesting review, in my opinion anyway, is one by Mr. Botley Smith, who has a Nine Inch Nails blog called This Noise Inside My Head, where he analyzes songs. It's actually just started within the last month or two, so if you want to, you can get in on the ground floor with that. And I'll put links to all this stuff in the show notes. And he says, the album feels haunting and unnerving, exercising notable restraint for showing and then hiding its layers, building and releasing tension in the listener for its 62 minutes. On top of all that, it boasts insanely catchy pop song hooks with dance beats galore. And I think that sums it all up pretty well. Dancey, but also restrained.
Yeah, that was a great review.
Not easy. Yeah. And, if you're really listening to the lyrics and wondering, gee, I wonder what this might be about, you really want to check out that blog and check out his take on it. Like I think I said previously, he does kind of characterize it all in terms of addiction, which I think is not really quite how I take it, but it's still a very, very interesting, more analysis than review, really, but a very interesting analysis. Is there anything on the topic of reviews or anything else you guys would like to say before we sign off?
I think one thing that's interesting is what we were talking about earlier, where, if you hear Ghosts, you're like, okay, I already know this language, I already live in this world, so this makes sense to me. I think that's also going to happen with a new Nine Inch Nails album. If the lyrics are very rhymey, very A-B, verse, chorus, we're going to go, oh yeah, we're used to that, that's normal. But somebody who's reviewing all music critic is going to be like, well, compared to everything else, these lyrics are not that interesting and that kind of thing. And I think it's just, as much as I'm not trying to defend anybody, I just think it's also difficult because we're coming from a place of we know what to expect. We're not going to expect anything to be a certain way when we're used to it being the way it is. But reviewers are going to come along and say, like, well, fuck everything else he's done. I'm just reviewing this based on other music that's coming out right now. And I think it's just really tricky. It's like ranking your favorite albums or saying something is good objectively versus your own bias and that kind of thing. So it's just my point being that reviews are silly. It's just really hard to unless they're stupid like some of these are, but otherwise.
They're either silly or stupid. Those are your choices. You don't get anything else.
Still fun to read, I suppose.
Right, yeah, fun to read.
Although with what you said about trying to put it in the context of other current music, I mean, that is interesting, but sometimes I find it could just be because I'm not knowledgeable enough about, hip-hop or a lot of other things that the kids are listening to these days.
Right.
But sometimes it seems like these comparisons they're making are really a stretch to me. Like some reviews will say, well, clearly this song that Trent Reznor wrote would not exist without something by, I don't know, by hip rhymer X. And it's like, well, how do you know that?
Right, totally.
Yeah, the majority of it wouldn't exist without him, so.
Yeah, so there.
Yeah.
There, take that. Put that in your bag.
All right.
On that note.
On that note, I guess we are done with our pilot premiere testing hesitation marks episode. I want to thank the audience for listening to this. This is an experiment. We weren't really sure it was going to work, but it seems to have worked out pretty well, I think. Gonna call?
Yeah.
Hey.
Okay.
And we will probably be joining you for another episode, which will probably be about Pretty Hate Machine, because I think we're going to go through the studio albums in order. And yes, Broken is a studio album. I don't care what Spin or anybody else says.
Totally.
And of course, there's a lot of other stuff going on in Ninland with the festival tour that recently concluded and a lot of other stuff. So we actually have a lot of options for stuff to go into, but we'll see. All right, thanks again for listening. I'm Karen, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for having us.
Bye.
This is the Spin review of Nine Inch Nails' Hesitation Marks, a dramatic performance. Title: Nine Inch Nails' rhythmic jack move, Hesitation Marks makes it rain acid beats. 9 of 10. As a record from the gear-grinding, blood-letting, mud, sweat, and tears, industrial void enterer, Trent Reznor of 9 Inch Nails, Hesitation Marks is an almost scandalous powering down the hate machine and revving up the man machine, boldly exploring, quote, EDM, unquote, for a generation of headbangers still coming to terms with the throbbing gristle of, quote, EDM, unquote, period. As part of a cultural movement, it's the third in a trilogy of bluntly minimal albums, following the Knife's Shaking the Habitual and Kanye West's Yeezus, that has turned Icon's chosen genre into a blocky, clinical Piet Mondrian painting. Noise is rendered as tight, impenetrable polygons of sound. Beats are clicked together like Duplo bricks in primary colors. 808s are heartbreak, and everyone seems to be jacking to the same circa 1988 Chicago house records. All of which to say, this is the most important artistic statement for Nine Inch Nails leader Trent Reznor since the late 90s, when Spin dubbed him, quote, the most vital artist in music today, unquote. You can follow Reznor's status as a relevant figure because it always runs parallel to his relationship with hip-hop, another genre that hit pop pay dirt with noise, repetition, and most vital artist in music today. Reznor was Loud Generation vanguard when he was also on rap's cutting edge, 1989's Pretty Hate Machine churned with the tinny, broken Walkman, traffic jam bustle of Public Enemy, open parentheses, thanks to the liner notes presumably sampled, close parentheses, semicolon. 1994's the most vital artist in music today. Grit and somber confessionals of Wu-Tang Clan, open parentheses, Hurt was properly sampled by Ice Cube's West Side Connection, close parentheses, semicolon. And 1999's long-awaited The Fragile had the widescreen, altruistic vision of Dr. Dre, open parentheses, who helped mix, close parentheses, the most vital artist in music today, who got a remix, close parentheses, period. But during the 4 albums that made up his 00's output, the very idea of a, quote, vital artist, unquote, in pop or alternative music itself got replaced with the messy democracy of the internet. And while Reznor was an early pioneer of online commerce and conversation, the avowed Pitchfork reader, Hyperlink, had some trouble staying ahead of the game, spending the majority of the decade chasing the wake of Queens of the Stone Age, open parentheses, 2005's Getting Smaller, close parentheses, Hyperlink, Jux, open parentheses, the most vital artist in music today, close parentheses, and James Murphy's, open parentheses, 2008, Discipline, close parentheses, or just teaming with unfashionable dudes, Hyperlink, like Saul Williams. Through coincidence or design, almost scandalous Kanye fan, close parentheses, Hesitation Marks surges with the energy of modern hip-hop. Hey, the surge of modern everything. Sometimes beats have the skeletal post-hippie sploin of DJ Mustard or Drew P. Sometimes they work as a harder Latin counterpart to the hinged house drone machine. That is capital A, $A, B, Fergs, Trapboard. It's hard to imagine slinky down staircase drums satellite and into
happening in a world where Timbaland hadn't existed.
It makes sense that rap's biggest envelope pusher, Kanye West, and industrial space on Low recently turned their live shows into theater. Reznor blowing the shadow of 10 feet tall for his Tension 2013 tour, Kanye performing as Negative Space at the Video Music Awards. Both are pop stars who have been proudly reduced by recruitment at some point, literally using a spotlight to negate their role as pop stars. The huge sucking abysses of nothing, open parentheses, period, close parentheses, on their respective albums feel like a final frontier in confrontation. Kickstarted by Portishead, open parentheses, 2008's Third, close parentheses, attended by MIA, open parentheses, 2010's Maya, close parentheses, it's a trend that let the festival headliner like Reznor make magic on beats that sound like a busted Mad Lib invasion, open parentheses, stumbling misaligned hi-hat and disappointing, close parentheses, or saxophones that strobe like blinking pixels, open parentheses, see the end of the line still here, close parentheses, period. And, unlike Radiohead, you can dance to it. This is acid. This is clean, almost basement-breaking beats are days of futures past. Chicago House is already seeing a revival on the gnashing edges of the noise scene, open parentheses, Vatican Shadow, comma, no on acid, comma, Albert, comma, unicorn hard on, close parentheses, and the hyper-accelerated drum stadium, no parentheses, Squirrel Rex's horror ray project, comma, Dog Blood, comma, is a metal up your acid mix, Green Velvet Gone Black album, close parentheses, period. It's all hyperlink potential to be the internet generation's Ramones t-shirt, abrasive, infectious, aggressively simple. After 10 years of having monster drummers, open parentheses, Dave Grohl, comma, Josh Freese, comma, Steve Burton, comma, close parentheses, wage war against the machines, comma, Reznor uses a steady, unadorned, corrosive electronic pulse in Prince singles, Copy of A, and Came Back. The Captains of Space are more destructive than, say, writing another March of Pigs. And totally postmodern, when you get Lindsey Buckingham to play guitar over them. Only one song allows Illa Rubin to play live. And when guitars finally do come in, like on the airy running, they are strangled, choked, tied up, and denied their Jimmy Page orgasm. This is an S&M torture trick. This is the first time since the Schooly D Wrecking Ball Pound of 1989 is down in it, that Reznor's music has pulsed with the actual sounds of hip-hop art form, close parentheses, the drums of Chicago House, comma, Detroit House, comma, and hip-hop, close parentheses, instead of
Napalm's approximated a black art form, parentheses, like Gang of Four, and a certain radio beats that propelled 00 singles like Only or The Hand That Feed, close parentheses, period. All Time Low, a song that splatters like a glitch mower version of David Bowie's
This
might be the exception. But remember that the thin white Duke's groove was super bad enough for James Brown himself to gaffle it outright for 1975's Hot. I Need to Be Loved, Loved, Loved.
Almost
All in all,
scandal.
Trent makes everything majorly funky for a song with a line, this paranoia turns to fear. All of which leaves Outlier everything. A Camaro blasting, a sunny Rick Springfield / romantic tune right down the center line of the LP, even though it's easily the happiest song on an album that boasts lines like, yesterday I found out the world was ending. It's Aggie New Wave is easily the catchiest thing on the record. It also makes some sort of weird sense in a time where Bruno Mars is approximating the police and 2 Chainz is rapping over the neck. Through his own twisted K-hole, hashtag art pop, icon Reznor is once again one of the most vital artists working today. Coming back haunted, breaking the habitual.
Well, I managed to avoid listening to the leak. I didn't touch it, and I lasted until I think the Friday night, and my wife eventually was like, for God's sake, just go download the damn thing and stop. Put me out of a misery.
Leave me alone.
Stop pacing the living room.
Were you just sitting there, like, listening to the Downward Spiral on repeat, like, just a few more days?
Just really echoing the sound, going, I can't read this thread. I can't read this thread either. I can't read this one either.
He's not 31. Get him out of here.
Yeah.
This is, like, the only instance when people might lie about being over 30.
Yeah,
right.
no.
I'm 31. Oh, what's your name? Madison. No, you're not.
No, you're not.